All right, everyone. I wanted to talk today about insanity and sanity and how they are technically illusions, actually, more than anything else. They're effectively culturally based. For example, you see the story of Johnny Appleseed. Native Americans, in some groups, they believe that people that were, what we would call delusional, were actually gifted. They were considered shaman and beyond reproach in some cases, actually. Johnny Appleseed wore a pot on his head when he was mumbling to himself and planting apple seeds. That's why he's called Johnny Appleseed. This is apparently a true story. This is apparently not just folklore, it's actually real. And so they left him alone because they thought this is a person who's a gifted individual. What we would call schizophrenia or delusions or something like that actually was considered gifted in some of these societies. And so ultimately, what we call mental illness, which is a term that I generally don't even like to use, or delusions, insanity, and so forth, in some cultures were considered perfectly normal. For example, we would consider eating the corpse of your dead relative, generally speaking, to be a bad thing. Now, for medical reasons, of course, I would agree with this. But for any cultural or ethical reasons, other cultures believe that it is not only acceptable, but in some cases of import. I prefer to divert to pragmatism based on, in many cases, medical understanding and things like that, as opposed to religion. And again, I'm reminded that, of course, some people think that they're drinking the blood of Jesus Christ when they go to communion. And so sanity and insanity effectively are nothing more than civic constructs. It's what the society happens to believe in. And there are sub-societies too. For example, the early Christian movement was considered effectively insane by the pagan Romans. Latter days, the paganism was considered insane by the Christians. It basically just depends on who happens to be in control at the time. Could be civic, could be religious, could be a mixture of the two. That tends to be effectively what you get. I would say that it's better to be pragmatic, but again, this is just my opinion. I believe in survivability. That's why I believe in independence and things like that. But this is just my opinion, ultimately. So insanity can effectively be described as a deviation from whatever construct happens to exist at the time. Again, not to get leftoid on you, but bear with me. That construct in some cases can be very, very far left. If you have a communist society, I think that East Germany is probably the best example. For example, in East Germany, the KGB could come into your house and rearrange your furniture and then diagnose you with schizophrenia if you complained about it in any way. You knew that the KGB was in your house, but they would declare you to be insane simply because you noticed the fact that somebody clearly had come into your house and rearranged everything. This was done to political dissidents on an irregular basis. So, what is insanity? Again, it's conformity more than anything else. If you conform to the social customs and to the law and things like that, you will not be declared insane. If you deviate from them in any significant way, you're declared insane. Um, there's also another example. I've noticed, and some of you may have noticed this as well. If a person is poor and unskilled and they show elements of, mental illness, they're considered mentally ill. If a person is rich and has skills of any kind, they're considered merely eccentric. It's a little bit of a differentiation between the two. It's the same concept. It could even be the same behaviors. But because of the socioeconomic status and because of the level of skill, person who has a lot of skills, maybe they're rhetorically talented, maybe they're really, really good at carpentry. It doesn't really matter, and that they have to have some degree of wealth. they'll be considered an eccentric. Well, you don't have OCD. You just really, really like collecting this sort of object, ceramic frogs or something like that. Well, you're just an eccentric. If somebody who is poor does that, if somebody who is relatively, they're flipping burgers for a living, and they collect the ceramic frogs, then you've got OCD. My God, you got to cut it out. ADHD is another great example. ADHD is really just kids don't want to sit still for hours at a time. That's basically all it is. Depression, another great example. Who wouldn't be depressed in this society unless, again, they have significant means? And apparently, peak happiness happens around when you're making 75K or thereabouts. When you make more than that, you tend to spend over your means, and that makes you depressed. If you're making less than that, you can't pay the bills, and so you are depressed. I think that most of the population effectively is what we would consider clinically depressed, but it means nothing. Sanity and insanity, technically speaking, are illusions. What it means to be sane is to conform to societal standards. What it means to be insane is to non-conform to societal standards. Not necessarily, a little bit, that's tolerated. But to any considerable extent, the more and more you do so, you're considered nuts, basically. You're considered to have gone mad. This is very, very intriguing to me, actually. This is an anthropological video, by the way, more than anything else. Anthropology and psychology, the latter of which is fairly indefinite, actually. Um, Very, very interesting. That's about all. Peace out.